Welcome back. In our previous lesson, we actually discussed, we started the series with the comprehension passage. In our previous lesson, we were able to deal with the statement and the various types of statements. You could recall, I explained and I told you that statements represent the language the examiner uses to convey his message to the examinee. And we discussed about 10 different types of statements, where we discuss the indirect factual statement, the implied statement, the statement of probability, the factual statement or the direct factual statement. We also discussed the absolute statement of fact. We also discussed the non-absolute statement of fact. We discussed the absolute deduction. We discussed the statement of probability. We also discussed the conditional statement. But today, our lesson for today centers on mood and tone. Now, the first way to discuss is to explain the concept of mood. What exactly do we refer to as mood? Now, mood, this refers to the state of one's feeling or mind at a particular time. Now, to ascertain the mood of a person, his facial expression has to be looked into, or to get the mood of a speaker, his choice of words, which is the diction, has to be observed. Now, so which means that to get the mood of a speaker, his diction, which is his choice of words, is the first thing to actually look into. Naturally, if you want to determine the mood of a person, to say either the person is sad or a person is gloomy, you look at his demeanor, which is just his facial appearance. But looking at a speaker or a writer, you are not seeing. The best way to identify his mood is by looking at his diction. Now, why do we place emphasis on the diction? Because the latter is very important for us as far as this examination is concerned. So as a JAMB student, once you look at your comprehension passage and you see a question on mood, the first thing you have to look at is to identify the choice of words of the speaker or the choice of words of the writer. That is a pivotal point in determining what the mood of a speaker is. Let's take this example. I can't believe this, so I made it at last. I can walk tall and meet those who call me failure and tell them that success has become my other name. My sleepless nights have been adequately compensated, my effort crowned with laughter. Let anyone who cares to listen know that I have become the Hannah of our time. The question is very direct. What the mood of the speaker is? We have option A, elated. Another word for elated is happy. We have another word, sad, gloomy, and indifference. Now, looking at the choice of words of the speaker, how do we now know his mood? Let's look at it again. I can't believe this. So he's actually surprised. So I made it at last. Look at that first point. I made it at last. I can walk tall and meet those who call me failure and tell them that success has become my other name, which means there's already a successful outcome. My sleepless nights have been adequately compensated. My effort crowned with laughter. Let anyone who cares to listen know that I have become the Hannah of our time. And I ask, the mood of the speaker here is what? Option A, elated. The speaker is actually what? Happy. Let's take a good example of example 2. Why is my case different? Is it attending of lectures or taking of notes? I was second to none. Is it reading for hours or contributing in group discussion? I was an epitome of diligence. All I have received is failures as wages. Bola Ige, tell my forefathers their son is coming home soon. Then I ask, what is the mood of the speaker? Now, comparing the choice of words in this second example and the choice of words in the first example, how do we now see the difference? The difference is clear. Why? Because of the diction of the speaker. In this place, or in this particular passage, we have option A, despair, option B, optimism, option C, joyous, option D, indifference. The mood of the speaker here is what? Despair. The speaker is actually what? Sad. That's despair. That's the mood of the speaker. So for you to actually understand mood, you actually have to understand the diction of the writer or the diction of the speaker. Now, quickly, we're looking at tone. Very important. Under tone, why have we have to look at tone? Or what exactly do we refer to as tone? Now, tone is, this is a language used to express the mood of a speaker. The language used in expressing the mood of a speaker is actually referred to as what? The tone. This is a language used to express the mood of what? A speaker. Now, so which means that there is naturally a nexus, which is connection between the mood and the tone. Now, if the pivotal way of conveying the tone, or of the pivotal way to convey the mood of a person is by actually looking at the tone. So first is to ascertain the tone of a particular passage, the mood of the speaker must first be ascertained. So to get the tone, you must first and foremost ascertain the mood. Why? Because it is the mood, it is the tone that is being used to convey the mood of a speaker. So in our last, what we just discussed lastly, we actually discussed the mood. Now we are expressing what the tone is. And I said the tone is the language used to express the mood of a speaker. And there is also a connection between the tone and the mood of a person. That connection is the vehicle through which the mood is being expressed. So we can also say that tone is the vehicle through which the mood is what? Expressed. So if I want to express the mood, the vehicle used in expressing the mood is the tone. So there's naturally a connection, or there is a nexus between the tone and the mood. So to get the tone of a speaker, the mood must first be ascertained. Now we now have different types of tone. For the purpose of these exams, we have to discuss the various types of tone. The first type of tone we have to discuss here is the satirical tone, which is also called the satire. Now, how do we say, or what exactly do we refer to as a tone being satirical? Now, when a piece of writing, are we down? Paints a picture of the misdeed in a society, paints a picture of the misdeed in a society with the aim of correcting the misdeed or the ills in the society without the writer placing condemnation directly on the misdeed, but rather allows the reader to place the condemnation. So what are we saying here now? A tone is said to be satirical naturally when a writer talks about the misdeed in a society or paints the picture of an ill happening in the society with the aim of correcting that ill. But the writer himself did not place condemnation on the actual misdeed in the society. But what he does is that he allows the reader to actually place condemnation on the misdeed. Let me give you a good example. How many of you have watched your normal Nigerian movies? You will discover that you are watching a particular movie. There is a particular character in that movie that has actually is a bad character. Why is he a bad character? Because the role he or she plays in that particular movie entails evils. Now, what the writer is doing in that regard is that he's actually painting the picture of a particular thing happening in the society with that particular character. Now, you now discover that at the end of the movie, let's assume nothing evil happens to that particular character. What would you say at the end? You just say, this man for die in this movie. This man, this should have been killed. This should have happened to this man. Now, do you know why you are saying that? Because the writer only paints the picture of the misdeed in the society, but he allowed you to do what? Place condemnation on the misdeed. So which means the writer just paints the picture of the misdeed, paints the picture of the ills in that society. His intended intention is to correct the misdeed in that society. But what has he done now? He has allowed you to place condemnation on the misdeed. Such a tone naturally will have what they call a satirical tone. Now let's take a good example. There are one or two things this country can teach others. One of which is the act of writing obituaries. This explains why 1/4 of our average daily is constituted of obituaries and in memoriam alone. In this average daily, every dead Nigerian is described as a saint while alive. This act of eulogizing the dead and making their loss sound so heartbreaking is one of the commodities we can export to other countries. Then I ask us a question. The tone of this passage is A, angry, B, satirical, C, non-committal, and D, pleasant. Now, in this regard, what has the writer done? The writer has painted a particular ill, a particular misdeed, a particular action that is being carried out. Now, which is an ill happening in the society. But if you look at that particular passage, did the writer place condemnation on that particular ills? No, the writer did not place condemnation on that ill. Why did the writer not place condemnation? Because the tone he's using is a satirical tone. So in satire, what the writer does is clear. The writer paints the evil in the society. The writer talks about the misdeed in the society. The writer talks about the evil in the society. But the writer don't place condemnation on the ills or on the misdeed in the society. What the writer does is that he allows you, the reader, to place that condemnation on the misdeed. So you must be very careful under examination condition to know the pattern in which the writer is using. Because if you do not pay attention to the language of the writer, trust me, there's every tendency you might not get a question on that tone correctly. So what the writer does is to talk about the misdeed, and the writer will not place condemnation directly on the misdeed. The writer will allow you, the reader, to place condemnation on that misdeed. Look at this particular passage. We have option A. They said the tone of the passage is angry, satirical, non-committal, and pleasant. Trust me, the tone of the passage here is what? Satirical. Why is it satirical? The writer talks about the misdeed in the society, which is the act of writing obituary, making their loss sound so great, as if when they were alive, you do not praise them, but once they are dead, you start praising them. That is an ill in this society. But the writer, look at the passage you have read, did not place condemnation on that misdeed. The writer allows you, who is the reader, to place condemnation on that misdeed. That makes that tone to become what? A satirical tone. Number two, we have to discuss what? The sarcastic tone. Now, trust me, there is a difference between the satirical tone and the sarcastic tone. But let me quickly use this opportunity to explain the sarcastic tone. Now, a tone is also called the sarcasm. Now, a tone is said to be satirical when the writer paints the picture or use a piece of writing to paint the evil in a society or to talk about the misdeed in a society. But the writer do not leave condemnation for the reader. The writer outrightly placed the condemnation himself on that misdeed. Now look at the difference between satirical tone and sarcastic tone. Under satire, the writer talks about the misdeed. The writer do not place condemnation on the misdeed. Under sarcastic tone, the writer talks about the misdeed, and the writer places condemnation outrightly on that misdeed. Now let me also use the same example I used in the first type of tone we discussed. You are watching a movie. The writer is talking about the movie paints a particular character in that particular movie who has been acting so bad. He does evil. He does so many things that are not worthy to emulate. Now, At the end of that movie, something evil happens to that particular character in that movie. Let's assume the character dies. What would you say? You say that serves him right. Do you know the reason you have to say that serves him right in this particular one? Because the writer himself has placed condemnation on that misdeed. So under sarcastic tone, the writer talks about the ills in the society. The writer also places condemnation on the ills in that particular word, society. So under sarcastic tone, we said this is when a piece of writing, are we there now? Paints a picture of the ills or misdeed in a society with the aim of correcting the ills and also placing condemnation on the ills or the misdeed outrightly, or place condemnation on the ills or misdeed by himself. So we now said, looking at a tone being sarcastic, the writer paints a picture of the ills, but the writer also places condemnation on that ills or on that misdeed. So let's take this example. Should the quoted mouth have started their gatherings again? They come like saints and promise the masses even the impossible, an uninterrupted supply of power, free medical care, low-cost housing, good roads, free food for pupils in the primary schools, and lots more. But what do we see today? An uninterrupted supply of naira notes to their pockets. These holy sinners have failed Nigerians, and the only remedy is that they should be tied up to the stick and be given baptism of fire. Now look at this particular passage. What has the examiner done? The examiner here gave or talked about the misdeed in the society. But did he leave the reader to place condemnation on that misdeed? No. The writer outrightly condemned the misdeed in this particular situation. So once the writer talks about the misdeed in a particular society and also outrightly place condemnation on the misdeed in that society, such a tone will have a satirical tone. When I have the answer, the question is, the tone of the passage is A, satirical, sarcastic, analytical, non-committal. The tone of this passage is what? Sarcastic tone. Sarcastic. It is not satirical. Do you know why? Because the writer condemned the misdeed. If the writer has talked about the misdeed and did not place condemnation on the misdeed, then it would have been what? A satirical tone. But since the writer placed condemnation on the misdeed, it becomes what? A sarcastic tone. Now we now have the sermonizing tone. Now when a passage or a piece of writing conveys a moral lesson or teaches moral instruction. Such passage will have what they call what? The sermonizing tone. So how do we know when a tone is sermonizing? The passage itself will teach a moral lesson, or the passage will convey a moral instruction. These are the two pivotal keys in determining if a particular tone will be what? A sermonizing tone. Let's take a good example. It is not uncommon these days. What does it mean to be not uncommon? It means to be common. When you have two negative, it changes to positive. It is not uncommon these days to find female undergraduates throw self-dignity and their age-long protected family names to the wind. They hunger and thirst for heavenly bliss with the privileged men in our society who give them money in exchange for their STDs. It is time everyone knew that if God did not spare Sodom and Gomorrah, he will likewise not spare those involved in the trade of selling their bodies. Now that the tone of this passage is A, historical tone, non-committal tone, analytical tone, sermonizing tone. There is a moral lesson here. There is a moral instruction being conveyed here. Therefore, the tone of this passage is what? Sermonizing tone. We now have the tone of approval or disapproval. Now I want to talk about tone of approval or tone of disapproval. When a writer is involved in a discourse in the passage, and we now have two different opinions in the passage. If the writer supports a particular opinion in the passage, that particular passage will have the tone of approval. But if the writer listens carefully to the two different opinions and supports another, then he will disapprove the other opinion. So under tone of approval or disapproval, the writer can only ask you one. Is it tone approval or is it tone disapproval? So if the writer gives a support to a particular opinion in the passage, then that particular opinion will have approval. Then the other particular one will not have what? Disapproval. Let's take a good example. The present economic recession has made Nigeria to clamor for the return of the military. It is not in doubt that Nigerians understand the language of the rod more than that of the laws. Therefore, the only solution to our undemocratic democracy is the return of the military. Now look at it now. There is already a discourse in this passage about two different opinions, the military and the democratic rule. But where did the writer place his own support with? He placed his support under what? The return of the what? Military. So here, the writer, this particular tone will have the tone of what? Approval. Let's look at it again. We said, the present economic recession has made Nigerians to clamor for the return of the military. It is not in doubt that Nigerians understand the language of the rod more than that of the laws. Therefore, the only solution to our undemocratic democracy is the return of the military. So here, the speaker supports the return of the word military. So the tone in this passage is the tone of what? Approval. Let's take another example. The present economic recession has made many Nigerians to clamor for the return of the military. This is clearly a retrogressive thinking, as the worst democracy is better than the best military. Like the biblical Esau, who sold his birthright in order to satisfy his urgent need, hunger, and never regained it. So they now ask us, the tone of this passage is what? Disapproval. Why is it disapproval? Because the writer does not support the return of the military. He places his stent in the practice of what? Democracy. So you must be able to differentiate between the tone of approval and also the tone of what? Disapproval. Let's now have an historical tone. Now, a tone itself will have, or a passage will have an historical tone when there is a narration of occurrence of an event, either of a society, of a nation, or of a people, either in ascending order or a descending order. Once there is a chronological description of event, of a people, of a nation, of an institution, of anything exactly, either in ascending order or a descending order, such a tone will have what they call the historical tone. Let's take a good example. The world lost many geniuses in the First World War of 1914 to 1918. The League of Nations was formed to check the outbreak of another world war. This, however, did not stop the outbreak of the Second World War of 1939 to 1945. Soon after the Second World War, the United Nations the United Nations Organization was given birth to so that the world can have peace. Now, if you look at this particular passage, then I ask us, what is the tone of this passage? We have historical tone, satirical tone, non-committal tone, and the tone of approval. This is what? The historical tone. Why? Because they're giving us a chronological breakdown of events in what? The what? Ascending what? Order. So option A is the right answer, historical tone. We now have the argumentative tone. Now, under the argumentative tone, you always discover that what? Two people are giving different opinion about a particular subject matter in order to gain support of who is listening to them. So under argumentative tone, you always find two things that makes it very distinct. Two speakers will always be involved. You cannot have an argument that involves one person. Two speakers are always involved. And once you see a passage having two speakers giving different opinion or standing on different poles concerning a particular matter, or fighting for or fighting against or speaking for or speaking against a particular subject matter, such a tone will have the argumentative tone. Let's take a good example. I said Muhammad speaking, capital punishment is penetrant to the problem of armed robbery in Nigeria today. It is the only thing that can serve as a deterrent to others involved in it. Now, Abel is speaking, to err is human, to forgive is divine. Capital punishment is barbaric, retrogressive, and unproductive. Many armed robbers have in the past been given baptism of fire, but has that stopped others from involving in the crime? The answer is obvious no. Therefore, a capital punishment is not and cannot be the problem to armed robbery in Nigeria. Now, they now ask us a question. The tone of this passage is what? Very clear. The tone of the passage is what? Argumentative tone. Now, we've been able to discuss the mood and the tone. This brings us to the end of this lesson.